Sue, thank you. Wonderful. Helen has remembered to do that for us. Thank you very much. We are good. So Helen, could I ask that you load my slides and we'll start taking us through the session. Now, as I've said, we have got a very, very busy session today. If we just pop to slide 2 and just remind ourselves what we're here to look at today. So we're going to explore the engaged leader and how do they behave. We're going to look at your leadership shadow and how that impacts on engagement. And we've got a ton of tools and approaches to help you engage your teams in the world we find ourselves in now. Now, I'm anticipating a great session. I think it's very content rich, but of course, what we know from all of these previous sessions is the richness really comes from the depth of discussion that you enter into whilst on the masterclass. And we've given you a nice amount of time to participate and have some discussions in smaller groups as well. So please do fully participate, use the chat as well, and we can look forward to a great masterclass together. Does that sound all right for everybody? I'm looking for lots of nods and smiles, and I got them all, and I got some thumbs up as well, so we're good to go. Wonderful. Right, well, let's move. Is that somebody I've missed? No, just a noise. And we'll just move on then, Helen. So as part of your pre-work for this session, you were asked to ask your team to gather in feedback on earn the right to lead. And I'm just wondering how many of you had the opportunity to complete the pre-work. And if you did, if you want to bob into chat or indeed come online and let us know, were there any headlines or any thoughts or reflections you'd like to share around completing that questionnaire? It's really important because, of course, it sort of builds on trust, which is one of the foundations of engagement, which is why it links so beautifully with this as a topic. I don't have a team, but I asked for some feedback, but you didn't receive any. Oh, Emma, that is a real shame. That I guess that is an indication of how busy people are, but I wouldn't give up. Ask again and see if people will take the opportunity, or perhaps go and have a coffee and see if they will offer up some feedback that way. Did anybody else get any useful feedback that they thought was really pertinent to the topic of engagement that anybody would like to share? No, you all just sat with it?
I have something. It wasn't specifically related to this. I'll hold my hand up in that the pre-work for this I didn't specifically do, but I had asked for some feedback from people that I worked with, and it gave me a bit of a mind shift, because I have always felt that my feedback, I wanted feedback around what gave me the credibility to lead, as in I'm really good at delivering this, or the experience that I had that would give me that credibility to lead. And the feedback I got was more around my behaviors and how actually the behaviors that I had were the useful things in helping me to lead. And I suppose I'd been looking for one thing and I got something else, and I found it really, really valuable and made me just think differently about what I needed to focus on.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's it. That's great insight in terms of behavior. And of course, as a leader, you're watched all of the time. You're watched all of the time. So your behavior means so much, and it's fundamental to this topic. So it will be interesting, Rachel, for us to bear that in mind as we go through. And I'm looking at the chat, and Jill has come forward and said she's had some positive feedback and was super pleased. How nice that the feedback was more positive than you are to yourself, kinder than that. Danielle, you got some great feedback as well, and you've got some interesting feedback there, Sue, from a peer group as well, which is great. So good. Well, as we go through today, I'll be really interested for you to make the links between the feedback that you've received and just how that plays as strengths, or indeed as those things you could do more of, to underpin just how engaging you are as a leader and how effective you are at engaging those around you. So we will make more definitive links between your pre-work and the course as we go through, is the intention. Lovely. Let's move on then. I think those questionnaires are always fabulous. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up a conversation around how do we actually define employee engagement? It's a big topic. Lots of people talk about it, but I'm really keen to hear from you around how would you define employee engagement? What does it mean to you when we talk about it? And I'd love to hear some thoughts, either again vocally or popped into chat. How would you define employee engagement? It can take a lot of guises. What are the thoughts? Two-way communication, Rachel. Thank you. Active listening. Absolutely. Sarah, feeling seen, heard and valued. Oh, Sarah, you're going to love one of the models I'm bringing to the table. Relationship you have with your colleagues. Absolutely. In the picture, informed, motivated to contribute. That's lovely, Sue. Feel involved and valued. An advocate for the organisation, open, honest and valued communication. Yes, communication figures really heavily there. Dialogue where people feel heard, understanding the bigger goal, aligned with values. There you are. Look, it's all coming in thick and fast. Open and valued, safe to share. Yeah, having a safe space and feeling there's a safe space in which you can express yourself and be your true self is hugely, hugely vital and a wonderful measure of just how the culture is and how engaged people are, I always find. Wonderful. Well, there's some lovely thoughts there. So let's just move on. And it was really interesting when I was preparing for this work, this masterclass, I was going to call it a workshop. I was just reflecting on my own experience of employee engagement, because I think it's something as a leader that, if I'm honest with you, I didn't really have front of mind or conscious until a very nice thing happened. Now, not in too distant past, I was leading 1,500 incredible colleagues across many disciplines, geographically spread, in an organisation we would all know well. And I had been asked to set up a brand new function. And that year, the people survey went out, and what came back was a 96% completion rate from my people and 98% engagement level. And it was the top of the company by quite a distance. And all of a sudden, people started saying, "My goodness, Jane, what is your secret? How have you managed to obtain such high scores?" And for a while, I felt a little bit of a fraud because I thought, oh my gosh, it's not anything I've consciously done. I've not consciously attended to employee engagement. I've taken leadership very seriously, but it's not something I've done. So I actually started to almost walk back up the chain to see how we had achieved such big results. And that was one of the reasons why this topic became of such importance and interest to me. Now, when you go on to look at the definitions of employee engagement, there are hundreds of them. I found 150 just while I was preparing for today. 150 definitions. How mad is that? And I'm sure there's more. I just got fed up after trawling 150, looking for something that might have given us a golden piece that maybe some of the others didn't pick up. But in truth, we've just named much of what employee engagement is around. And these three summed it up very beautifully for me. Is this involvement and enthusiasm of employees in their work and workplace. It's about the energy that an engaged employee brings with them. And of course, that increases their resilience, their dedication and their enthusiasm. I think a lot about the fact that an engaged employee, there is something around it unlocks discretionary effort in a way that nothing else can. And you see people flourish and bring more of themselves to the party, which is just a joy. and means, of course, your performance at work and the team's results just increase no end. And I love this piece around absorption and the fact that it talks about how a worker really feels towards their jobs. But you know this because you have just spoken about that in the chat pass so far. So I think we've all got a pretty good handle on how we would define employee engagement. Now, the truth is, though, whilst it might appear quite simple, it's a complex topic. Now, if we just move on, I've always thought about employee engagement in very simple terms, because whilst there are many, many different definitions, in simple terms for any employee, it's about being connected at a head and heart level with the work that they are doing. And the piece that has always held me in good stead, and I think is fundamental to our approach to employee engagement, is understanding how we as human beings are wired. Now, it's important for all of us. The way in which we are wired, the way in which we respond to life, is that we want to be seen, heard, and recognized for who we truly are, which in turn will mean we believe we matter and we know we belong. And if those things are in place at an individual level, then chances are within the workplace, if that's how I feel, I will become engaged. Alongside, of course, from a head perspective, my technical skills and expertise being utilized fully, and ensuring that I feel like I'm being stretched and developed. Those things along being seen, see me, hear me, recognize me, fit beautifully. And that's where the head and the heart equation fits in. I always think a good measure of this in terms of how your heart is engaged, and I see it amongst my friends often, is if somebody starts to post on social media that they're not looking forward to their Monday morning. They're not looking forward to going back into work. And I go, there's an indicator. Let's reach out there and just see what's going on. Because I have to say, for me, I love my work. I'm so engaged with my work so much. I don't even consider it work anymore. It's just gorgeous life. And it's just part of the flow. And I don't really make the distinction. But I think if work is a pleasure and you're looking forward to stepping into work on a Monday morning, that is a pretty good personal indication to how engaged one feels within that workplace. And if there's something else going on, sit with that and work out what it is that you need to be different, to enable you to be 100% engaged. And I think that's a wonderful test, because if you can make sure you're 100% engaged as a leader within the context of the role, the chances are you're going to be able to authentically engage those colleagues and teams who you are leading within the organization. From an authentic perspective, if you're not, then I would always encourage naming it and going seeking what it is you need. Now, of course, the other complexity around employee engagement these days is that of old, quite a lot of the techniques around engagement were quite head-based, and leadership was based in the head. But particularly since COVID, particularly as we find ourselves in society dealing with the post-trauma of COVID and just kept coming to terms with what the pandemic meant for all of us and all the changes that are now all around us within the workplace, heart-based leadership is really, really, the need for that is really increasing. And the beauty of that is it lends itself, if you're focusing in that area, it means you're in exactly the right place around employee engagement as well. And of course, the other thing to bear in mind is your engagement starts with an individual, it operates within the team and the organization context as well. So how are you engaging at those levels through the organization so that teams are feeling seen, heard, and recognized, that the organization feels so and the individuals feel so as well, because you'll flex your tools and techniques to deal in those three different contexts. Now, is there any questions or thoughts that you'd like to offer up around some of that thinking around heart-based leadership and the need to see, hear and recognise. Anybody want to add their thoughts to that? Is it all making sense to you? Any thoughts? Nope. I am going to take that as we're all really comfortable with where we're at, or we're either absorbing everything that has been said already. Wonderful. Okay. So if we think about head-based leadership from an employee engagement perspective, it's really important you've got clarity of vision, you know your outcomes, your ambition is inspiring, that it leads to great decision making and it leads to great prioritization. Those things are almost the hygiene factors for employees to be able to engage in the first place. If we think around heart-based leadership, that's where the heart connection comes in, where empathy, compassion, warmth, people seen as the most valuable resource in the organization comes through, and leaders who are willing to serve their people generally operate with a really beautiful balance of heart-based and head-based leadership. That's where we need to get the balance. You can't have one without the other. You need the both to be able to properly engage employees as you go along. And I agree with you, Rachel. It's surprising how much a small thanks can make a big difference to people being valued. I absolutely agree with you. And one of the things I think is trickier these days is how you achieve that with more hybrid working. And I wonder if that's something that we will unpack in a little while. It used to make such a difference. Everyone in the office, and you would literally walk over to somebody's desk, sit with them for a moment and say, I just wanted to come across to say thank you so much for that piece of work, or I'm noticing you today and here I am. That's harder in hybrid teams. And interestingly, because of the way in which we're working now, employee engagement is more important than it's ever been, but it's more tricky and more complex. But those small gestures that touch your heart mean everything. I agree with the importance of that. Wonderful. Let's move on then. So I don't know if any of you have heard of Ian Hutchinson. Ian is an employee engagement expert. He's well known quite globally. He wrote a brilliant book. The book was called People Glue, Employee Engagement and Retention Solutions That Stick. I love People Glue. I thought the qualifying statement was a bit bland, but actually the book is really good. And what Ian talked about here is that employee engagement is an investment we make for the privilege of staying in business. And I love it. It absolutely recognizes the fact that it's a core investment that needs time and thought associated with it. And I thought it was very pertinent to share today. And Jenny, you're right, visible leadership is so important. And it needs a lot of effort, absolutely, when you're managing remote teams. And again, I think for visible leadership and presence, how is your presence felt by your workforce if they're working remotely from you? Because with presence comes engagement. So how are you dropping in to be present in their days as they are sat at their computers in their homes or coffee shops where they've chosen to work? And what does your presence feel like when it lands with them? Are you just checking in on task? Or are you seeing, hearing and recognizing them for where they are and what they're doing and how you're checking in? It's a really interesting thought and question I would ask you all consciously, ask yourselves each time you've got your teams working more remotely. So we are moving on, and I'm sure that many of us have heard for a long time that employee engagement is really critical and it matters on so many levels. And I've given you some ideas here on the left that it really, not only does it enhance things for the individual, which I think is really, really important, it enhances performance for the organization. So it's a very compelling why for anybody, particularly if you've got leaders sat at the top of the tree who are very head driven. Well, it's just, this is a fundamental requirement in order to get your organization results. Like, this is not a nice to have, it's essential. But of course, for the individual, it enhances their well-being, it gives them job fulfillment, etc. And of course, it deepens that trust in those relationships. Now, I've put a few up here that seemed front of mind to me, and I wondered if you've got some other ideas around why employee engagement is so critical. And again, I'd love to hear from you. I'd encourage more talking out than perhaps using chat if anybody's got something they'd like to add. I only picked out a few here for the purposes of today. I'm sure you can see other benefits. Anybody like to share?
I'm happy to share.
Lovely, go for it, Sue.
So yeah, I'm in a completely remote sort of team, but we're kind of pan-European. So, you know, we can't be face to face more than a couple of times a year. And I mean, I've been putting things in our kind of Teams chat channel, and I got really nice proactive feedback from like a number of people that it was clear that I was driving engagement in the team and keeping us together, and to keep doing it, even when you don't get many replies, that it is appreciated. So yeah, I think it kind of is really helpful with remote teams of keeping people together. And it's that, I think it's a bit like putting money in the bank, isn't it? Kind of, rather than just kind of asking things from people all the time, it's just building that team cohesion. You kind of put money in the emotional bank that you can then, you know, you've got something to draw on, rather than it just being radio silence until you need something.
Yeah, definitely. And I love the fact that you found a channel of communication there. One of the things that's so important, particularly with hybrid teams, is just what listening posts and channels of communication have you got in play? And are there sort of clear unwritten rules about what kind of communication goes through those listening posts, so that you know, oh, well, this one over here, I just know I'm not going to get bombarded with task and feedback. What I know is it's about team and me. And over here, this is the channel that's used to talk to me about task. It's lovely having that kind of distinction, because for you as an individual on the receiving end, you can then make choices about where you want to engage, given how you're feeling in that moment in time. But yeah, feeding it, like you say, if you're not always getting feedback back, but continuing to feed it, it's lovely to hear that it's making a difference. And just being creative about what you push through those channels of communication as well. You know, if I look at my desk at the moment, I don't show you, but I have these wonderful quote cards that I'm dipping in and out of at the moment. I have a lovely calendar which has got motivational quotes on. I've got a couple of beautiful books that I use. I love The Horse, the Mole and the Boy book. I mean, what a beautiful book. So when I want to touch somebody's heart, and I try and do it regularly with people, certainly the people I'm coaching, they will always get something from me at some point in the day when I get a sense that they might need a little boost or a little reminder about how brilliant they are. And I see you, my thoughts are with you, and I'm going to show you that by using communication. So it's, yeah, lovely listening posts. How many other anybody else would like to add around why employee engagement is so critical, and some ideas like Sue has used there with her use of Teams?
Jane, for me, the consistency of communication is important. So I find that always having open dialogue and always being really cascading information, and it being a two-way open forum with my team has always helped, so that it's not just when you need something, it's actually consistently cascading, talking, open, sharing ideas and collaborating as a group. Because as a leader, I don't have all the answers, and very often my team have many of the answers. And I found that being really consistent in that approach has really helped kind of solidify my team and my wider operation. And I think that it got us through some really difficult challenges, you know, like the pandemic. And because we work in that way, we overcame a great deal together because we had the open lines of communication consistently.
Absolutely. Yes, so important. And I think the other piece around that is just volume of communication. I've often come across leaders who they're worried about overload. I don't want to overload my team. But what's really interesting when you then go and talk to the teams is they go, I don't hear enough. So it's communicate, and communicate some more, even when you think that perhaps you're in overload, because it doesn't land that way.
Yeah.
Yes.
And perhaps it's the channels as well, because I've found that you know, if I always did via email, it doesn't land as well as some of the face-to-face communications or team forum communications. For me, it's utilizing all the different channels to support that engagement.
Absolutely, definitely. Thank you for that, Jill. Really appreciated. And we've got some people really enjoying the quote cards ideas, and Anne, you're getting recognition here for some fabulous quotes and engaging tools there, which is nice to see. And an acknowledgement from Sue that, left out of communication so as not to overload. So the intent is there, but actually, you know, the intent is right, but the impact is completely the opposite. So again, being able to stay tuned in to those things as well. I mean, technology is affording us some wonderful channels that we can use. But I would also suggest some very powerful channels are still residing in the old-fashioned channels that we almost only had a few years ago. So nothing more beautiful than a little something arriving in the post, even if it's a handwritten note. Doesn't that just make you, it's joyful not to get a bill and to get something personal that somebody has written. I always think that's just such a lovely, lovely way of being able to recognize people who are working at home. And I loved this ditty on the right-hand side of the boat, because I thought it said it beautifully. Now, of course, you'll have some of your engaged workforce who are really committed, they're psychologically connected. That's where your retention sits, that's where your productivity comes from. You then know that you've got perhaps some individuals who are on the boat that are disengaged. They're there in person, but they're not there in mind and heart. They're unhappy, and actually they start to taint the culture because they're by their very presence. They don't hide their unhappiness, and they can start to influence the neutrality. Those that aren't engaged, they're productive, but they're not really connected. And you can start to see signs of those people just through attrition and some of your absence figures, sickness figures, that kind of thing, or perhaps some of your engagement scores. But of course, it's that not engaged audience that you are wanting to move up into that engaged box. You certainly don't want them moving down into the actively disengaged population. Now, I wonder if you gave a few moments thinking about your boat at the moment, how would you, and what sort of percentages would you give to your workforce? How many would you have sat in actively disengaged? How many are not engaged but are there right for the taking if you just tweak or turn up or amplify some of your activity? And how many have you got in the engaged place? And I just thought it was a lovely graphic to bring some of that alive. Now, of course, employee engagement fundamentally underpins a great place to work, and that in its own right encourages really fabulous team working as well, and unlocks collaboration like nothing else. So those are some of the other things that I think I'd call out. Anybody want to reference anything else around why employee engagement is so critical? Any other thoughts before we move on? I'm just going to do a time check. We are good for time.
Jane, as people were talking, I was thinking about like authentic leadership? Because I've certainly have worked for managers in the past where you kind of know and get a sense they're doing, oh, I need to say this now at this point, and it's almost like a tick box exercise. There's that kind of that warmth and authentic, so you can communicate, but it's kind of communicating authentically that I think just, you know, can make the difference on how it lands and how people feel about what they hear from you.
I think that's so true, Lorraine. And I also think it's about with whose agenda are you communicating with? Because if as a leader you're communicating from your own agenda and it's your own ego and requirement that needs to be heard, you're not engaging anyone. You're just pushing out. It's not, you've not sat with an engaging agenda for the audience. What is your intention for them? And I think it plays through this consciousness around, why do I want to communicate? Am I doing it for my audience? Is it the audience I want to see, hear and recognize, or actually is it for me? And it's an interesting question to ask oneself, and I totally agree with you. If it's not authentic, then you're on a hiding to nothing anyway, most definitely. And Sarah, you're pulling out the word warmth, and it can mean such a lot. Do you want to just speak a little bit more to that, Sarah?
Yeah. I think I suppose it goes back to your comment, Rain, about authentic, and that's I think Sue as well, actually. But I think it's about taking the time to actually understand what makes your team tick, what they value. Maybe even a little bit about them and their personalities, their situations, because I think it can really mean a lot if you can take the time to understand that person and what motivates them and maybe what's bothering them. I know it's hard if you've got a large team, but I think it can mean such a lot as an employee for you to feel like your leader knows you to a degree. It certainly does for me personally, and it's definitely been something that has helped me lead teams before.
Yeah, I think what you're highlighting is a beautiful thing, that if you don't have an awareness of truly where your team is at and how they're feeling, then any communication you try to land that doesn't acknowledge that won't chime.
Yeah,
you'll sit there in the audience and go, no, you're not understanding where I am in the first instance. And I'm doing quite a lot of work with across the criminal justice system at the moment. Now imagine the police and all of the furore that's going on in the media at the moment, where we've got some police officers who are not acting inappropriately in line with their police power. There's some damning reports that are coming out, yet you've got thousands and thousands and thousands of officers who go in and risk their lives to protect us day in, day out. Now, to not acknowledge those officers and how hard it is and tough it is and how emotional it is to hear those messages and hear a job you've been so proud of being labeled and tainted by some of these. If you don't acknowledge that in the first time you open your mouth, those officers aren't going to hear you at all, because they need that hurt and they need that pain acknowledged, because that's where you earn your trust, and they go, you see me, now I'm prepared to listen and work with you to change that. But it's so incredibly important to have that understanding of where your team are at, how are they feeling, and you know, if we think about the pressures we're all operating under at the moment, even if we think about the cost associated with living and the rising costs we're seeing there, it's having an impact on everyone. When I opened up, I talked about post-pandemic trauma. We are a society of stressed people. Every time you pick up a newspaper at the moment, we are learning about the increased mental health figures, and more people feeling more vulnerable than ever before, which is why what we're talking about today has become more amplified than ever before in terms of its importance. But that tune in, Sarah, is absolutely critical. And the worst leaders are those that second guess or think they know without truly going out and establishing how people are before they talk back. Really a critical point. Thank you for bringing that to the table. Okay, everybody happy to move on? I only see some of you, but I'm going to take yes, smiles and nods. We will move on. So in the next section, I thought we would now, so we've talked about the concept of employee engagement. We know it's really important. We recognise the complexity in terms of the circumstances we find ourselves in, but we also recognise the simplicity of it's about seeing, hearing and recognising the individuals or the teams. So we've unpacked it to that degree. What we're now going to do is start looking at employee engagement through the lens of the engaged leader. And what I'd like to do is ask Helen to drop you into some groups for 5 minutes, where I'd like you to talk about how would you describe an engaged leader? What are their behaviours? What are their traits? What do you do and say to demonstrate and support your engaged leadership credentials? Just unpack that for a few minutes and then be willing to come back and share that in the bigger group. Is that all right? So 5 minutes in your teams. How would you describe an engaged leader? What are the sort of traits and behaviours you would see? Helen, I'm hoping that's something you're going to be able to help me with. Oh, there we are. It's all done. Here we go. Wonderful. Well, we're all now back in the room. I'm just making sure we've got everybody who went has come back, I think, all bar maybe 2. That's always a bit of a worry, isn't it? That we've lost some. How did you find the conversation? Did any of you, what were the main points you pulled out? And did any of you have some light bulb moments or some thoughts around, yeah, I'd forgotten that.
I found it really interesting listening to, I was in a room with 2 other people that were actually work in the place where I work, which was very interesting. It's nice to hear their points of view working within the same, even in the same business. And I think trust came out massive with what we were discussing, and making sure that, you know, you show them you're human just as much as they are, and engage with them and treat them as an individual rather than a person that works with you.
Yeah, trust and showing some of that vulnerability and being really real. Yeah, I can imagine. What came up in other rooms, other discussions?
We used the word that Jill had mentioned before around consistency. That consistency, whether leaders are talking in a big group or talking to people individually, that's really key, because again, it's the credibility. Yeah, consistency and credibility, absolutely. Yeah, not changing the messages because you think that's what people need to hear, and forgetting that people talk. Yeah. What did she say? When did she say that? Well, she said something different to me. Oh, and then I always think where you imagine that might cause confusion, actually it tends to drive this big Machiavellian theory that the organisation's out to get everyone. It can get you into all sorts of bother, can't it? I've seen those things unfurl in many places. Consistency, I totally agree with. Any other thoughts that came out? Was it useful to split and hear from one?
We talked about the importance of managers being trained in these things, because if somebody has a a background like engineering or a clinical background, they don't always know how to be good managers.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's assumed they are.
It's so true, Anne. It's so true. Yes, we, particularly as people get promoted, we just assume that you have all of the skills and attributes that you're going to need to be a fabulous leader. What rubbish is that? What rubbish? Yes, but I understand. It's a good point. Absolutely. I thought that Darielle might have been coming in, but I think she's gone off camera. Anybody else got anything they wanted to add before we move on? No? Well, we will keep on going. Good, good. So here's one I prepared earlier. Helen, I'm wondering if we could go back to the slides. Oh, go back to the beginning. In terms of describing the engaged leader. So we've come up with some great traits. So if we just bob on. Move the slide deck forward. So we've picked out some of these already around traits. Now, emotionally stable. This is so critical, isn't it? Because you want to be seen, yes, authentic, and speak to emotion, absolutely, but keep a steady, calm tone associated with you. I've been sat in the audience when a boss has stood up, a leader has stood up and is worried about company performance, and you leave feeling like the whole organization is about to cave in around you because of the urgency or the worry that was associated with the message. You know, just one example. Ambitious and realistic, really important. Communication, we've talked about, nurtures those relationships, and I loved the point around warmth that sits in there. This piece, Sue made me laugh in our group where she talked about a leader where perhaps they'll ask her a question but just turn it back to her themselves in the conversation very, very quickly. So they're not focusing on her, they were focusing on themselves. We'll cut her off midstream to interject. So yes, focus on others. And this piece about emotionally intelligent, thinks intent and notices impact. Now, this was an interesting one because we shared the fact that quite a lot of leaders, well, as humans, actually, we're wired to pick up how other people are feeling. Our instinct will tell us, our gut will tell us, our senses will tell us that person A is not okay. It is the courageous leader and the skilled leader who step towards them to check in and find out what's okay. And what I'm noticing is there are quite a lot of leaders, and particularly if you're full up yourself, you know, if you're so full up yourself, you don't have the resilience, you might not feel you've got the skill, you might believe you're going to open up something that you can't deal with. And so quite a lot of leaders will say to me, oh, I knew they were in a bad place. And you go, and you did. They go, oh my God, I wasn't going to ask them. God, I wouldn't have known what to do. And so this piece around noticing and then doing something is so important. And then when we've got what we've got there on the right hand side is some of the behaviors. We've already talked about the importance of listening. Carol in our group, just as a wonderful share, has talked about Yuri. What was his name, Carol?
Yuri? William Yuri.
William Yuri, a TED talk on listening, and she took loads out of it. So it might be worth us all having a listen to that. I'm sure we're all up for being pointed to fabulous ways of learning. So Rachel, we're having to say goodbye to. We wish you a very good day for the rest of your day. Thanks for letting us know. And now we'll move on. So the engaged leader, we're pretty clear what traits, we're pretty clear of behavior. Now, the wonderful thing for all of us sat here as women, and we've talked about this before in sessions that I've worked with you, if we recognize we've all got the yin and the yang, that we're all made up of feminine and masculine energy, it's our feminine energies that hold us in such good stead when it comes down to engaging with other people and engaging our teams. And if you think about the conversations that we've just been having, intuition, expression, empathy, all of those things which are resonate from our feminine energy are all critical skills and attributes to being engaging. So I would think and give yourself some time to reflect on how much of your feminine energy and those attributes associated with it are you fully utilizing in the way in which you are engaging your people. Is there more you could do? Is there more you could switch up and use with more a positive intent? Now, I thought Maya Angelou, I mean, I do love her. I'll never forget this quote. I'm sure it's one you will have seen before. It's used quite a lot, but it's so true, isn't it? In terms of people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they never will forget how you made them feel. And I'm sure if we sit here for a moment and just think of our own careers, there will be 2 or 3 standout leaders that just touched your heart each and every time they work with you, and you'll be forever indebted to the difference they made. And it's one of those quotes that keeps me really centered, and I hope you like. So we're now going to give some thought to how well, therefore, do you engage? Now, the model on the left-hand side is the leadership shadow. This is our presence that we cast in our workplaces. And the presence we cast is around what we say and how we act, what we prioritize, and how we measure. And this is a model that I keep front of mind every single day. And then it's about, oh, we're losing Amy as well. Thank you very much. And this is a model that I keep in mind, and I'm encouraging you to ask yourself some questions around how consciously are you engaging at the moment. One of the big barriers that was talked about just now is giving time. So when are you at your best, you're engaging best? And what is making engagement tough right now? The lack of time was certainly raised in the group that I was in. And are there times at work when engagement is even more vital than normal? And I'm just really interested to hear, if we open up the floor for a few minutes, what your thoughts are when you're answering those questions for yourself. Or indeed, bob your thoughts into chat. Any thoughts? And is this something that you would consciously ask yourself and consider at the beginning of a week when you're looking at your diary and what space you've allocated to which activity? Are these things you would consciously consider? Any thoughts?
I'd like to make a comment on the last one about whether it's there's times where it's more vital. I kind of I can't decide in my head whether actually there is times where they're more vital, or actually it should just be all the time. But I think in my past experience, when there's been sort of a large amount of change that's going on, whether that be personnel change or projects or priorities, I would say that I've personally probably tried to make more of an effort to be a more engaging leader, because I can feel that it might cause anxiety or it might cause sort of upset if I don't do that.
Yeah, that's absolutely vital, Sarah. And change was one of the things I had in mind as well. As you say, as soon as you imagine something's going to shift or raise anxiety, you need to lean into that more heavily and almost be ahead of it. Anticipate.
Yeah, not avoid it. Yeah, I've gone like, let's go for lunch tomorrow, me and you, because this is going to be a bit rough. Well, not rough, but it may feel rough. So sort of not avoiding it.
Yeah, lovely. Leaning in ahead of it. I love that, Sarah. Thank you. Other thoughts? Oh, we've got some coming in the chat. So when a team is storming and forming, yes, absolutely vital. Active engagement in that. What's going on? Where are we? What were the triggers? What are we learning about one another? What needs to be different? Absolutely vital. And more pressure when vital when the pressure is on. Absolutely. It was really interesting. There was a anecdote, wasn't there? I can't remember which leader spoke to it, but they said when an organization is having a tough time, You need to celebrate all of the wonderful things. And when an organization is going through huge success, you focus on the things that need to be improved. And it's almost counterintuitive, but it's the way that you keep everybody engaged. And I thought it was such a wonderful spot. And it's always kept me questioning, where is the organization? Where's the team performance? What is it that I need to be speaking to? Because generally when things are tough, people go to things are tough and we need to improve. But this whole learning was, no, take exactly the opposite stance and see what gifts you reap as a result. I thought it was fascinating counsel. Any other thoughts on this before we move on? We'll move on then. Anybody else? No. So we mentioned this a little bit before, but of course, from an engagement perspective, you'll be thinking about it through 3 specific lenses, or I would encourage you to think about it through 3 specific lenses. How are you engaging the individuals and at an individual level so that you are really having that personal impact? How does that then wrap it up and get aggregated and extrapolated to your engagement at a team, an organization level? And what's the context of that? And what does that context mean for the individuals within your teams? And then, of course, for yourself, your leaderful self. So what is engagement looking like for you? How are you demonstrating it? How are you consciously stepping to the party? How much time and attention are you giving to engagement as a fundamental part of being a leader? And I think the other thing that this encourages us to do is not only does engagement require the very expensive resource of time, but it also can need other resources as well associated with it. So having wonderful story writers, engaging your comms people so they can talk with your tone of voice rather than their own. And as I said, everything from personal notes of thanks up at the individual level through to training, developments, incentives and rewards at an organizational level. On every one of those, that spectrum of consideration, you need to be leaning in that way, because there's so much in there for you to consider. So how much time are you giving that? Are those lenses that you would recognize you're using currently, or is it a good prompt for you to be thinking engagement through those 3 different lenses? Any thoughts? No thoughts?
I haven't really segregated it in my mind in that way, but it's useful too.
Yeah, it just allows you to think about weighting of effort and weighting of volume and presence. So if you think about, Jill, the consistency of message point, you'll want to flow the same messages through with the same intent, but your interventions might need to be different. Yeah. And are you making interventions that will touch both at an individual, team and organization level at the same time? Or what? Yeah. Who do you need to reach out in a different way? It's always just helped me be really balanced in terms of how we look at that.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, so let's all think about then, how are we going to improve? And there's, I'm sure you've got more ideas than I have. In terms of the model in the middle, we've been acknowledging already that feedback at an individual level and investing time, giving recognition, all really important, and considering the culture that sits around that individual and sits within the organization, focusing on those things, all really important. And then I've just given you some hints and tips really around some of these things that might be slightly different to perhaps how you might have approached things in the past, or again, we'll just put a light bulb on or suggest you go back and look at some of those things. But I'm wondering, you can read the slide yourself, but have you got ways to improve engagement at all in your organizations, or any thoughts over and above this that you'd like to share, or things that you're particularly doing in your company at the moment where you can see you're getting fabulous results? Let's use this as an opportunity to go away with some new tools here. Any thoughts? Jill?
Sorry, I feel like I'm talking a lot and don't mean to. We have a monthly town hall with myself and my senior leadership, where we have all our advisors and operational support teams face to face or joining via Teams. We record it and we also share that with our outsourced partnerships, and we just give business updates. And I also do monthly advisor forums and skip level meetings with my leadership team. Again, just as a different way of opening up conversation and kind of surfacing things that wouldn't ordinarily come out of our usual channels. So that's helped, particularly when we're going through some turbulence within the organisation, and there's lots of change happening and transformation, and it's unsettling. And I've found that having those forums and heading it up myself as I suppose the member of the exec team has just assisted with reassuring people.
Yeah, so that real presence in those different forums really working for you, and it helps you reach the audience, doesn't it, in different ways, which is great.
Yeah.
Have we got some other ideas or thoughts in the group around how to improve engagement? Any other thoughts? I'm sure you've got lots going on in your businesses. The other way to look at it, I guess, is have you got any challenges with engagement at the moment? You're sitting there going, I know I need to do more. I know, but I'm not sure which of these that perhaps would unlock and get engagement or start to be part of the answer for me. Anybody want to look at it from that perspective, or talk about any barriers or constraints that you're currently experiencing that we might be able to lean in and help on?
I can talk to a previous experience where somebody was doing quite a lot of these things and giving them the impressions of a good culture, but then the engagement score was drastically low. So I think it lacked the authenticity and listening. And yet, although the engagement survey was clearly valid and true, it was questioned, which I think then probably drove engagement even further down. So I think it's kind of all these things, but it can't be a tick list. It's got to be authentic and true.
Yeah, authentic, true, and real action come out of it.
Yeah,
once you've really heard. I think that point about the people survey, it's such an important indicator for all of you. Just how many people are filling them out in the first place? Is there a willingness to fill them out, or is there a reluctance? These organizations that police it, I go, oh my goodness, does that not tell you the very thing you need to know? Nobody's engaged enough to want to fill it in the first place, or they're too frightened to. There's your answer. Let's start there, shall we? Instead of beating people over the head to get them to fill in the survey, which you're not going to listen to or you're going to misuse anyway. That's why they're not filling it in. But we've all been there. I can see lots of people smiling and listening and acknowledging that. But yes.
So I think one of the other things that I've just last week we had a roadshow with our sort of top directors there and what have you. And the HR guy was doing a presentation and he stood up, and one of the things he said is, we've done the company survey. I think they do it once a month. It's by the same company that used to do the one at my other place. And he said it was giving these facts and figures that had come out as a result of this survey. And he said, and 45% of people aren't taking a lunch break. And then he moved on. And I thought, well, you can't drop a bomb in a room like that and say, 45% of people in this company do not stop and take a break for lunch, without actually saying what you're going to do about it. So the thing I took away from that is, if you're going to engage with people, you've got to follow through as well, haven't you? You've got to take things to a logical conclusion. You can't just pay it lip service. And I think we're back to that whole time thing we were talking about before, Jane, the fact that you need time, and I keep thinking, and I need a hole to open up in the space-time continuum, so that I can sort of focus on this, because what I'm hearing is it's terribly important, and it's what you should put at the front of your mind, and instead of it being at the back of your mind, and instead of it being the first thing that gets sacrificed when you're short of spaces to put yet another Teams meeting into. So and it's okay.
One of the things, if I can only draw on my own personal experience with any real authenticity, albeit I support lots of organizations to now look at this sort of thing. But when I had such a strong score, I sat there for a few days when people were ringing me, not only with this realization that, oh my goodness, they all think this is conscious and it's not, and I'm feeling a bit guilty about that, and I'm going to need to declare that perhaps it's more by chance and circumstance than it is by my own leadership design and attention. So I had to find myself in a place where I was going to declare that, but I needed to declare that. But the other thing I noticed when I really stepped back from that and said, oh no, I am going to take credit for the part I've played in this though, was I noticed I was doing less than ever before. I was doing less than ever before. My team was doing more. And I had totally immersed myself prior to taking that role on in the concept of service leadership. And I had totally immersed myself in the philosophy that the only reason I existed was to serve my people by creating them an environment where they could flourish. That was my role.
Yeah.
What that meant was it became very easy to prioritize my diary. Because my whole task, my whole emphasis in my diary in terms of how I was spending my time shifted. And I was able to speak to the fact that this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. Because I'm adopting this philosophy because I think it's so important. And that was one of the things that totally shifted it for me. But that was one of the things I noticed. I was doing less than ever, listening more than ever, and had a presence in the organization just to hear and listen, and then remove the constraints and create that. My job was to create them the environment they could flourish. That was all I did. And the team.
How did you? Can I ask you a question, Jane? How did you get out of the weeds in order to be able to do that?
I just stopped. Stopped doing it.
Okay.
Because you're operating at a level that is for somebody else to do. You're in somebody else's space if you're there. Step into your leader space. Put your different shoes on. I know it sounds easy to do, and I'm not suggesting it's easy, but test yourself around whose shoes are you wearing, and are you really in that leader space, and can you clearly speak about that's your intention and that's why your behavior and the time and your prioritization looks like it is. That's the leadership presence you put in the organization. It was the most joyful part of my corporate career, without a doubt, without a shadow of a doubt. I loved it, and I had a team that thrived. It was wonderful. Any other thoughts on ways to improve? Yes, this point around we mustn't overdo communication so that it comes noise, but you need to communicate enough so it truly gets heard. Absolutely, really important, Sue. Thank you. Any other words of wisdom or words of gold before we move on?
I think the celebrating success thing's really important, because definitely where I work, it often gets forgotten because we've already moved on to the next issue or concern.
Yeah, it's so important for recognition, and from a company organization, what did we do that works so well that we're going to repeat the next time? It's such a bizarre thing that we forget to do. Yeah, and give it the real time and the real recognition. Of course, if you've got a team of people or an individual who's recognized and their success is celebrated, what are they going to do the next day? You're going to unlock another level of discretionary effort, and they're going to be even more brilliant tomorrow than they were today. But yes, it is one of those things, again, particularly in pressured times, that we forget to do. And interestingly, what I hear quite a lot of companies saying, well, costs have gone up, our cost lines are under pressure, we can't spend the kind of money we used to on celebrations and things like that. And I go, well, I understand all of that. Do it differently then. Celebration doesn't have to be expensive. You just have to be creative. Interesting. It's a good spot. Any other thoughts on there? No, right, let's move on, because I was hoping I was going to help bring a secret weapon to the table. And I love this quote: the shortest distance between two people is a story. Oh, isn't that so true? Now, how many of you are actively using storytelling at a personal level as a leader and within your organization to increase engagement? Is it something, a tool that you're consciously using at the minute? Many of you. Can I have some thumbs up or nods or shakes of heads just to give me a sense of where that is?
Trying to consciously introduce it, yeah.
Trying consciously. Good. Well, this is an amazing thing. And it's an amazing thing because as I talked to you earlier and said around how we as humans are wired, our brains are wired in such a way that we love a story. So within our brain, we have this thing called the amygdala. Now, I always find brain science just blows my mind, right? It blows my mind. And I'm probably not intellectually clever enough to grasp all of the concepts. But somebody explained it to me really simply a few years ago, and it's really helped me ever since. So he described the amygdala in our brain as a bit like the bouncer at the door of a nightclub. So if something is coming towards you that your bouncer doesn't like the look of, it goes, no, and it just dismisses it, it won't let it in. If your amygdala goes, oh, I quite like you because you're already making me feel good, the amygdala responds to emotion. The amygdala, once something has got through the amygdala in the brain, because you're having an emotive response to what you are hearing, it helps you store memories, and it helps you recall, and it connects your head and your heart to what you are hearing, the stimulus that you are being offered. And the best way to get past the bouncer at the nightclub is to be pleasant and nice and warm and genuine and all about me. Because once you're there, my amygdala is already warmed up and is saying, come on in, come on in. And at that point, I'm then at a place where, just by virtue of how we've all been brought up and how we as humans are wired, we understand the construct of stories. We look for them in life. We understand that a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. We know that stories have characters that we like to engage with. We know that often in a story, there is a heroine and there is a villain. If there's some of those that you can bring into your story, even if the villain is a competitor, fabulous. Everybody can grasp that concept. Your amygdala loves it because your emotions are already getting wired up and they're letting this stuff in, and it starts to get stored in memory. So the art of storytelling is something that I would ask you all to consider. And think about where you're using stories. Do it very safely, first of all. What's your own story? Think about Simon Sinek and the masterclass we did on the power of why. You see, these things all start to knit together, don't they? So your storytelling there, but I truly can't say more strongly enough that storytelling is your absolute secret weapon. And if you are not working hand in glove at the moment with your communications director, go make best friends and get them to help you understand the true art of storytelling, but find your own story and your own voice. Is anybody using these techniques already? Have you enjoyed storytelling already? Anybody using them?
I tried it in a conference. I was kind of put up on the spot to communicate something and tried it. I think I'm a bit kind of, I guess I'm quite scientific and maybe a bit literal, and I kind of struggle with, so like for me, some top tips on how to storytell, really helpful if anybody can recommend any resources so it feels a bit more natural.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, we'll invite Sue. We'll invite everybody, if they've got resources, to pop them in chat, either currently or after, and see what we can come up with. But there are some lovely ins to this as well. As soon as you say imagine, the amygdala goes, oh, hello, what am I imagining? Hello. And then if you can start with imagine and then talk to an emotion, the amygdala's really warmed up then, is already thinking, oh, you might be quite nice, I might let you in. It's just some interesting techniques, but we'll all share. Now, I'm aware that there are quite a few people dropping off, and we're in the last 7 minutes of the session. So I'll give a couple of minutes to any Q&As. If anybody has got a killer question they feel that they would like to ask, and then I'm going to set you a task for the last 5 minutes of the session before we say goodbye. Any killer questions out there or killer reflections? No, it sounds not. Right, we're going to move on then. So, as with all of these things, and Sandra would kill me if I didn't end up with something really tangible. So as a result of this session, I mean, you've all come to the table sounding like you're all engaging really well already. You know what you're doing. It sounds like we might have sparked some additional thoughts. But can you take a few moments thinking about your biggest takeout of today, and what's the one adaptation you think you're going to make to the way you lead that you can improve engagement, perhaps a takeout that you've taken from today? What's the thing you're going to take away and start thinking about and do differently tomorrow? And if you could drop those into chat or indeed speak to them, that would be really, really appreciated just in these last couple of moments. So any thoughts on what you're going to do differently to improve engagement? And I am reading the silence as thoughtful. So Darielle, make the time to ensure my team gets an opportunity to celebrate success. Wonderful. That's great. Use storytelling, use the word imagine, more active listening in team calls, model good behavior. Oh yeah, multitasking. Let's stop doing that. Let's really listen. More structured engagement into the front of my diary. Wonderful. Wonderful. Oh, your lives are going to feel so much nicer with that as well. It will start to feel joyful. I know this. I know this. Any other thoughts? There's some fabulous thoughts there. Being present in meetings. Yeah, how many of us are guilty of not being? Prioritize and be clear on that. Investigate storytelling. Definitely want to feel more joyful. Oh, how nice. Focus on storytelling. Introduce storytelling. Yeah, wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful. And just, if you're going to do that, start about your beginning, your middle, and your end. Who's the villain? What's the circumstance? Who's the hero? Talk to the emotion, warm up your amygdala at the start of your story. Any other thoughts?
Jane, I was just wondering, is it possible to maybe for you to have a word with Sandra and just tell her that, you know, more than one of us was interested in a bit more info on the whole storytelling piece?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe we can do a little bit of an extra session on how you might warm up that amygdala a bit more and then know that they're going to let you into the club.
Yeah, because I think like Sue said, it would be good to have some sort of examples of how you would do it, because to go from a standing start with no sort of frameworks quite difficult, particularly if you are a more technical or sort of practical minded person.
For sure.
Really good.
For sure. And there's lots. I'm sure we could, maybe we'll stand up a learning lunch or something, and we'll all munch and learn together. Something like that might be quite nice, mightn't it? I'll talk to Sandra.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we are almost out of time. Any more thoughts on what you're going to do? I know Sandra likes to hold you all to account on going away and trying something. Any other thoughts?
I've got the John Lennon song in my head to remind me. So imagine all the people.
Well, how wonderful.
Left on the call, you've got my singing to contend with now.
Do you know, I can't think of a nicer way to finish a masterclass with a song. How wonderful is that? That sounds wonderful. Look, I hope you have found it useful. As ever, we would welcome the feedback. I know Sandra would be really keen to hear how things have gone and whether it was useful to you, and if there's any changes you need. I've heard the request around storytelling. So thank you very much for sticking with us, and go and enjoy an engaging afternoon, let's hope. And it was a pleasure to spend some time with you all again today. So thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye. Helen, I'll stay on with you.
I want to say thank you, Jane. Really improved my day. Having a shitty day.
Oh.
Yeah, me too. I think there's something in the air.
I feel so much better. So thank you. Really good session.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Carol, my lovely. Oh my goodness. What are we going to do?